So continuing with our nerve plexuses, again, it's an intermingling, interweaving of the ventral rami of the spinal nerves, and they occur in different parts of the body. So they split into the distal, moving away from the spinal cord. The nerve plexuses will then split into what we call the named nerves that then innervate the body. And as you can see, it's pretty complex and there's different terminology. We'll try to keep this as straightforward as possible, and there's only a few nerves we'll need to know by name. So the plexuses are the cervical plexus up in the neck area, excuse me, brachial plexus just inferior to that, they go into the arm. Remember, brachium is arm. Lumbar plexus in the lumbar area, and then the sacral plexus coming out of the sacrum. And sometimes the lumbar and sacral are combined into what's referred to as the lumbosacral plexus. So the named nerves, for example, the median or the axillary or the radial nerve here, or let's say the ulnar nerve, are formed from axons from different multiple spinal nerves. So in a way, it's redundant wiring to a particular area. And that's good, because if you have damage to a particular spinal nerve or a region of the spinal curve, it doesn't mean that you automatically have complete loss of innervation to a particular region, because each spinal nerve that emanates or comes from a particular plexus is served by axons from different multiple spinal nerves. So again, it's redundant innervation, which is good because it helps minimize the overall effect of potential damage. So the cervical plexus out of the neck, it's formed from the ventral rami of spinal nerves C1 through C4. Innervation, the head, neck, chest, and the diaphragm. Okay, so the cervical plexus will innervate these regions of the body, and the only excuse me, nerve you need to know by name is the phrenic nerve. You don't need to identify it on diagram. In lab, you do need to identify it on the plaque, the spinal cord plaque, because it's pretty obvious, the phrenic nerve. And that actually innervates the diaphragm, helps with our control of breathing. Okay, and that's it for this cervical plexus. Brachial plexus going into the arm, formed by the central rami of C5 to T1, those spinal nerves. And notice this does get pretty complicated from the ventral rami, trunks, divisions, cords, nerves. You do not need to know these at all. All you need to know is what I have in text, which is what we've been doing from the beginning, right? Brachial plexus from these rami, innervation, pectoral girdle, and the upper limb. Okay? The only nerves you need to know from the brachial plexus are the radial, median, and ulnar nerves. Not too bad. The radial nerve, what bone do you think it's close to? Radial bone. Radius, I mean. Ulnar nerve, ulnar bone. Okay? There you go. And then the median nerve, well, it goes between the two. You see right here, median nerve. Okay? By the way, if you've ever hit your elbow and you banged your funny bone, you get that weird tingling, that's because the ulnar nerve goes posterior behind the medial, sorry, here's the cursor, the medial condyle, which is called the trochlea, and the epicondyle at the elbow joint. So when you bang your elbow, when you hit what's called your funny bone, actually what you're doing is you're banging and causing a mild bit of trauma to the ulnar nerve, and we feel that as that shooting weird electrical pain because you've hit the nerve just right. So that's bang. Hitting your funny bone is actually stimulating the ulnar nerve right in that region right there. That won't be a test question. Lumbar plexus, okay, off of the ventral rami of spinal nerves L1 through L4. The innervation is the lower abdominal muscles, the muscles of the pelvic girdle and the region of the pelvic girdle, the genitalia, and the thigh. So a fairly large area. The only nerve is the femoral nerve, which goes towards the thigh musculature, and it's right here. All right? Do we see it here? Yeah, right there. Femoral nerve. And then lastly, the sacral plexus off of the sacrum. For the most part, formed from spinal nerves L4 through S4. And notice this real thick big one. Innervation, gluteal area, pelvis, thigh, leg, and all the way down to the foot. And your sciatic nerve, if you have sciatica, that's compression pain on the sciatic nerve. And that is your largest and longest nerve in the body, going from this region all the way back down. Okay? Extending and branching into the other nerves. Sciatic nerve off the sacral plexus. And again, the lumbar and sacral plexuses can be combined into what we call the lumbosacral plexus. Okay, intercostal nerves. These are nerves that are going between the ribs, hence the name intercostal nerves, formed by the ventral rami of T1 through T11, those spinal nerves. They do not form plexuses. Notice it's kind of just a solitary nerve going out between the ribs. Innervation, the intercostal and abdominal muscles. So remember the intercostals for breathing and the abdominal muscles in the abdominal area. Flexing the vertebral column, lateral bending, compression of the visceral organs. Okay, reflexes. Quick, spontaneous, involuntary reaction of a gland or a muscle to a stimulus. Yes, you do have conscious awareness of what's going on, like, ouch, that hot flame, but by the time you think that, so let's say you touch the hot flame without seeing it first, like you're reaching over to grab something and you accidentally get your finger too close to the hot flame, you will be yanking your hand back as you are consciously thinking, what the hell was that, right? So it's a quick response, involuntary reaction to some stimulus. So the stimulus, pain, stepping on a tack as an example, and then a really rapid response. This goes into the spinal cord and right out of the spinal cord. Pre-programmed response, so it's a survival mechanism, and involuntary response. Before you even know what's going on, you're pulling your hand away in this example here. Like touching a hot flame, you remove your hand before you get full awareness. So you have your sensory neurons in your skin that are going to detect this pain, sending the signal, action potentials into the central nervous system. Afferent sensory neuron, right? Dorsal root ganglion, that synapses with a interneuron here. And the signal goes right into then action potential signal, goes right into a motor neuron, that cell body, and that action potential nerve impulse is now leaving efferent pathway, motor neuron to the effector, in this case the skeletal muscle, to have you pull away. Now the interneuron will also synapse with a sensory afferent neuron that's going to go up an ascending track in the white columns, if you remember that, up to the brain. Your brain interprets, ow, that hurts. What could that be from experience? Ooh, fire, ouch. And then your brain is sending a motor command down to pull away, but you've already pulled away because the reflex arc is faster, quick, pre-programmed involuntary response. Like our poor kitty cat here. I spent too much time on Google Images. Okay, so it is a survival mechanism, hardwired into our body. So the reflex arc, let's consider the wiring and the steps. So 1, the sensory receptor gets activated by some stimulus. The sensory neuron sends that signal action potential into the central nervous system, afferent sensory pathway. Sorry, input processing in the central nervous system by the interneuron, or sometimes we'll see, that sensory neuron might synapse directly with the motor neuron. That's step 3. And then, by the way, the interneuron is sending the signal up to the brain. Step 4, the motor neuron gets activated. Action potential nerve impulse is going to the effector, in this case, the muscle, via the motor pathway or the efferent pathway. And then lastly, the response of the effector, in this case, is to move away from the painful, in this case, painful stimulus. Okay, so the 5 components of a basic reflex arc. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So classification of reflexes: a monosynaptic reflex, there's no interneuron, monosynapse, one synapse. So the sensory neuron synapses directly with the motor neuron. This is the simplest, fastest reflex arc because there's only 2 neurons involved. Quickest reflex because of that. So example, the patellar knee jerk reflex, which is a stretch reflex, is an example of this. If you've ever been in a doctor's office, they tap notice there's a patella, there's a tibial tuberosity, so that's a patellar ligament. They hit it with a little hammer to pull on it, to stretch it. It pulls the patella down a little bit. The patella then pulls on the quadriceps tendon, pulling it, and then it pulls the quadriceps muscles. Within the quadriceps muscles, you have a receptor. It's called a stretch receptor. A modified skeletal muscle fibers that are called muscle spindles. They're evolved to detect stretch. So this would be a rapid, small little pull on this, and that will activate the sensory neuron into the central nervous system, spinal cord, synapse directly with the motor neuron, and the motor neuron innervates the effector muscles, in this case the surrounding quadriceps muscles, to contract, to basically resist this sudden, instant, quick pull, that stimulus. And in contracting, they extend the knee a little bit, and your foot kicks out a little. All right, so that's the knee jerk reflex. It's a monosynaptic reflex. Now, polysynaptic, meaning more than one synapse, that has the interneurons, and that's the first kind we looked at. So slightly slower because of the additional neuron in there, but still pretty darn fast. So this flexor, or the withdrawal reflex, like to a pain stimulus, is an example of a polysynaptic neuron, like our kitty cat over here. And that's the figure from your textbook. Okay? Just showing you 2 motor neurons innervating a particular muscle, or maybe more than one muscle. So the spinal reflexes, stretch reflex is a monosynaptic reflex. That's the one we talked about with the knee jerk reflex. It's designed to maintain the optimal muscle length. So again, when that sudden little pull happens, your reflex is protective in the sense to resist the pull by contracting the quadriceps muscle, and that kicks the foot out. Okay. Again, it's an example of what type of reflex? Only 2 neurons, so monosynaptic. The patellar knee-jerk reflexes of this type. A monosynaptic, it's a stretch reflex. All right, that's it for this chapter.